I found the extra credit submissions stacked on my desk, neatly stapled, perfectly formatted, and addressed to me in handwriting I recognized. The only problem was the name on every paper belonged to a student who died last semester. I teach an intro course that everyone thinks is an easy A. Big lecture hall, 300 students, the kind of class where faces blur into a single shifting crowd of hoodies and laptop stickers. I'm the one who insists on printed exams, blue books, margins wide enough to show your thinking. My colleagues call it old-fashioned. I call it accountability. The first week of the new term, I announced an optional extra credit, a one-page reflection on a single question. What do you believe the classroom owes you, and what do you owe it? And I made it clear it had to be turned in physically. No email, no upload, paper only. I said it like a joke, but I meant it because I wanted to see who would actually show up. 2 days later, the stack appeared. No envelope, no rubber band, just 15 papers, aligned so perfectly the corners could have been measured with a ruler. Each one clipped with the same brand of staple, pressed at the same angle. The top page had my name written in the upper right corner, the way I write it when I label my own folders. Last name first, then a comma, then my first. It's a habit I never taught my students. I flipped the top sheet over and saw the student name, Elliot Harper. That name had been on my roster last year for 3 weeks. Elliot sat in the third row, left side, close enough that I noticed he always brought a paper notebook in a sea of tablets. He wasn't loud, wasn't disruptive, wasn't memorable in the way professors mean when they say a student stands out. But I remembered him because he came to office hours once and asked a question that didn't fit the assignment. Is there a way to write an answer, he'd said, that's correct now, but wrong later? I'd laughed. Not at him, just at the strange precision of it. I told him knowledge evolves, yes, but arguments have standards. He nodded like he was listening to something behind my words. The next week, campus police sent an email. Student death, privacy requested, counseling resources available. It wasn't my business, but I'd looked up the name anyway. Elliot Harper. Accident, late night, no further details. So seeing it printed at the top of an extra credit paper in the new term made my stomach do something slow and cold. I told myself it had to be a prank, a grieving friend, a tasteless joke. Then I read the first paragraph. It addressed the prompt like a straight-A response, but it didn't sound like a student trying to impress me. It sounded like someone documenting a rule. The classroom owes me a boundary. I owe it the truth. If either side lies, the room will correct it. I read that line twice, then looked around my office like the room might be listening. The building was quiet. Saturday. Sunlight through dusty blinds. I could hear the old radiator tick like a clock. I checked the other submissions. All signed Elliot Harper, all written in the same measured, steady voice. And each paper contained a tiny detail that made my skin prickle, a sentence referencing something I had not said out loud yet this semester. A joke I'd only practiced in my head, a slide I'd drafted but hadn't presented. An example I plan to use next week. At the bottom of the third paper, there was a line that didn't belong in an academic reflection at all. Please do not let the room take attendance. I sat back, palms flat on the desk, and tried to decide what the room meant. On Monday, I walked into the lecture hall early. It's one of those old auditoriums built when universities wanted to feel like cathedrals. Steep seats, dark wood, high ceiling, a chalkboard that slides on tracks and leaves chalk dust in the grooves like sediment. I've always liked it. The room has presence. When it's full, it almost hums. My TA, Lila, arrived with a tote bag of quizzes and a coffee she'd already started complaining about. I didn't show her the papers. I didn't even want to hear myself explain them. Can you take attendance today? She asked. The department's being weird about participation metrics. I looked at the empty seats. I thought about the warning. Not today, I said. We'll do it later. She shrugged. Your call. Students filed in. The familiar chaos. Backpacks thumping, laptops opening, whispers rising and falling. I ran through my lecture. The material was fine. I hit my jokes. They landed, everything felt normal, and I started to feel foolish for letting a stack of paper get under my skin. Then 10 minutes in, the projector flickered, not the normal loose cable flicker. The image collapsed inward, like the center of the screen was being pinched. The slide reappeared, but the title had changed. Welcome back, Elliot. My throat tightened so fast I couldn't speak. A few students laughed, thinking it was a planned bit. I tapped my clicker. Nothing happened. I tried to Alt-tab on the podium computer. The mouse moved, but the cursor lagged, like it had to swim through syrup. Then the roster page opened by itself, my university's attendance portal, logged in with the class list displayed. Next to each name was a small checkbox, and the boxes began to check themselves. One by one, like an invisible hand moving down the list. Students began murmuring, not because they could see the roster, most couldn't, but because they could feel the air shift. The room's hum changed pitch. The lights dimmed a fraction. A pressure built behind my ears, the sensation you get in an elevator when it drops. Lila leaned toward me. "Professor, is this you?" "No," I said, but my voice came out thin. The checkboxes reached the bottom of the list. The hum stopped. For a beat, everything was silent. 300 students silent. Then a phone rang somewhere in the back. A student answered, whispering, "Hello?" and then went pale as if the voice on the other end had spoken directly into his bones. He stood up without meaning to. His chair scraped. Everyone stared. He walked down the aisle like he'd been called to the front of a church. He didn't look at anyone. His eyes were glossy, unfocused. "Sit down," I said, sharper than I intended. He didn't. He reached the front row and stopped, standing below the chalkboard, facing the seats, facing us. He swallowed and opened his mouth. And a voice that was not his said calmly, "Present." A ripple of laughter tried to start, but it died immediately because the tone wasn't funny. It was procedural, like a box being checked in the universe. The student blinked hard, like waking up, and looked around in confusion. He staggered back to his seat, shaking. I forced myself to breathe through my nose. I reached for the keyboard, and I typed in the search bar of the attendance portal, Elliot Harper. The system auto-filled. It was already there, a name on the list that should not exist in a new semester. And it was marked present. I heard myself speak, trying to sound like a professor, like a person with authority over a room. "Everyone, we're going to take a short break. Please step into the hallway." They didn't move. Not because they refused, because they couldn't. I watched hands grip desk edges, knees locked, faces tense with the instinct to flee and the inability to obey it. The room, I realized, had taken attendance. My eyes went to the stack of chalk by the board. White, dusty, harmless. I grabbed a piece and wrote on the board in big letters, "Who is doing this?" The chalk squeaked at the end of the question mark. For a moment, nothing. Then chalk moved on its own beside my words. Not floating, dragging as if pulled by a careful hand. Letters formed slowly, the way someone writes when they want to be understood. "You asked for paper only." I stared at the sentence until the edges of my vision blurred. I wrote back, "Why are you here?" The reply came faster, almost impatient. "Because you didn't grade me." My mouth went dry. "Elliot," I whispered, and felt ridiculous doing it. The chalk wrote again, "Not Elliot. The room uses names." I remembered the line, "If either side lies, the room will correct it." I tried to think like an academic, like someone who survives by defining terms. "What do you want?" I said aloud. The chalk paused, then wrote in smaller letters, "A clean roster." A laugh barked out of me, half hysteria. "That's it? You hacked my attendance system because the roster is messy?" The chalk underlined the sentence 3 times, hard enough to snap. I looked at the students. Real people. Breathing, confused, afraid. Then I looked at the portal again and saw what I hadn't noticed before. Several names on the list were faint, as if the text opacity had been lowered, as if they were already being erased. I leaned toward Lila. My voice shook. "How many students are actually enrolled?" 302, she whispered. The roster showed 310, 8 extra. 8 names the room had invented to make itself correct. I knew with sudden clarity that the room wasn't trying to scare us. It wasn't even angry. It was doing what it thought it was supposed to do, enforce a rule. Attendance marked. Roster consistent. Reality tidy. And anything that didn't fit would be corrected. I grabbed the microphone. It squealed. Too loud, then settled. "My mistake," I said, and I forced the words out like I was pushing through wet cement. "We're not taking attendance today. I'm canceling this record. Everyone is dismissed." The room didn't react. So I did the only thing I could think of that felt like the opposite of a checkbox. I told the truth, out loud, to the room. "I don't know every name," I said. "I don't even know if my list is accurate. I'm responsible for teaching the people who show up, not for forcing order onto them. If you need a boundary, here it is. You don't get to edit my students. The air tightened like a fist closing. The lights flickered. The chalk rolled off the tray and snapped in half. Then the projector image returned to my normal slide, like someone had simply closed a tab. A few students gasped. A few laughed nervously. The pressure in my ears faded. People began to move again, slowly at first, like they didn't trust their own limbs. Chairs creaked. Backpacks zipped. The spell broke in 1,000 small human sounds. Lila grabbed my arm. "What was that?" "I don't know," I said, and I meant it. After the hall emptied, I went back to my office and pulled out the stack of extra credit papers. Every page was blank. No prompt, no handwriting, no signature. Just 15 clean sheets, stapled perfectly, like they'd been prepared in advance for a story I hadn't written yet. On my desk, a single line remained, pressed into the top page so hard it left an indentation, readable if I tilted it toward the window. "Please grade what you receive," and that's when I understood the final correction the room was going to demand. Not attendance, not rosters, me.